What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Ben. I have been riding KLR650s for the last 8 years now, and if you guys haven't heard, I've decided that it's time to move on to something else. And just because a lot of you guys have told me over the years that I should really either be on an XR650 or a DR650, I've been looking at those. Last week we looked at the XR650, which definitely had a lot more ground clearance, a lot more suspension travel. It definitely seemed like it was more set up for what you're seeing me do here on the old KLR. So last week when we were over on the Honda website, I told you guys that I kind of considered myself a Honda guy, even though I hadn't owned that many of them. They've just kind of always been my favorite for, I guess, one reason or another. But now that I think about it, I've actually owned way more Suzukis than I have anything else. I've got a four-wheeler made by them right now. They really make a lot of stuff, and I guess I didn't realize it, but I mean, you can definitely tell looking through this list. I mean, they make a lot of different bikes. Granted, a lot of these are kind of the same motor, but I mean, even still, they've got a lot of different bikes in each one of these categories, and they've got a lot of categories. But anyway, though, we are in the dual sport section here today. And if you guys are not aware and you haven't been following long enough to remember the story, I will regale you once again. Once upon a time, I was only a street bike rider, got really sick of not being young enough to ride around fast and being too old to ride around comfortably at all, or to cruise around comfortably on a Honda CBR 600RR. So I decided to buy myself a DRZ 400 here. My year model was a 2008. And I really did like that bike until I tried to take it up to my trails on the 55 mile an hour county roads, and especially the highway. It just was not a fun bike for that. So I assumed that my next best move was going to be to go to a bigger displacement engine, something that was hopefully meant a little bit more for what I was trying to do, which was leave my house from the garage on the bike, ride an hour north, and then get off of the pavement and then ride trails for, another hour or two and then ride back home. So I actually had one of these bikes lined up, ready to go look at. I can still remember the picture that I got from the owner that I had plastered to my desktop for a couple weeks. I knew I could have just slapped a windscreen, a universal clear windscreen on here and made it work, but it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted something that was an adventure bike, which is really how I got introduced to adventure bikes. I really had no idea that they even existed up until the point that I started looking at the KLR650. Bought my first Gen 2, rode that for a bit, then bought a Tenere 700 because I thought I wanted something faster. Then the redesigned 2022 model of the KLR came out, and I decided I wanted to try that out alongside the Tenere, and now here we are back at the DR650. One of my buddies actually did pick up one of these bikes not too long ago, and I've got to say, I think if I was to pick one, I would probably pick the yellow and blue color scheme that he's got on his. This is just a really neat looking bike. So if you guys haven't seen it, we've got a couple videos out there doing some mods on the bike. And then, well, if you guys aren't aware, I actually did buy a 701 not too long ago. It seems like a lot of people don't know that. I do have to say that I did really enjoy the test ride that I took on this bike. I did also get to experience this off-road a bit, and I think it'll be interesting to kind of go through the specs, having been on this bike both a little bit on the road and a little bit off-road. So just like my buddy Jason's bike, this has no skid plate at all. Overall styling of the bike has changed a little bit throughout the years. If you look at an older model, it will look a bit older. I like the updated cowl, the newer fender that they've got on here. The 2024 DR650S continues to reign as the best all-around dual sport motorcycle available today. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. This one's the best. I guess I should have bought this one. Always an outstanding performance value. Every DR650S is quality built by Suzuki and features a dependable 640cc oil-cooled 4-stroke single engine. Single engine? Like single cylinder engine? Carried in a strong steel semi-double cradle frame. A variety of riders can enjoy this motorcycle thanks to a seat height that can be significantly reduced using the optional short side stand kit from Suzuki. I mean, I guess it is nice that they have the side stand kit available if you lower the bike, but that in itself isn't going to lower the bike. Anyway, though, strong aluminum spoke style rims carrying tires that can manage the street or dirt are, oh boy, fitted so riders can tackle pavement or trails with ease. And they just go on about the graphics and the colors and that sort of thing. The tires can be rode on dirt, but I wouldn't really suggest them for dirt. I believe these are trail wings, and they are nicknamed on the internet as death wings. And I mean, they're, whoa. they'll make the bike feel much smoother on the pavement, but off-road, they're going to make you feel like you bought the wrong bike. And I promise you didn't. You just need a tire that's more aggressive, and you're going to have to take it a little bit easy on the pavement, but if you're going to buy a bike to take it off-road, you might as well be able to take it off-road. So put some way more aggressive tires on it, and don't worry about the pavement. Just go slow and don't low-side yourself by spinning your knobbies on wet pavement. Wait, what? Can you get this in 2 different colors, or you can't? Now, one thing I noticed about the XR after I did the video on it is that the back portion of the suspension components here are sort of just like missing, and I think maybe that's the uni-track suspension or whatever they call it. It's all just sort of hidden up under the bike. This doesn't get in the way a whole lot, more so just when you're jacking up the bike, but I think it would make me feel a lot better to not have this hanging down at all back here. So kind of interesting, and I guess something to keep in mind if you're comparing these three. Let's see, what do we got here? Key features. True dual sport, the DR650S is ready to cruise around town, up the highway, or down your favorite trail. The smooth shifting transmission with easy pull clutch takes it easy to ride the DR650 on any kind of road. Makes it easy to ride? Okay. Convenient push-button electric starting, makes it sound fancy, easily gets the torque-rich 640cc air and oil-cooled 4-stroke thumper ready for fun. Built around cast and tubular parts that are precision welded together, the strong steel frame has high-quality suspension and brakes components. High-quality suspension and brakes components for... Okay, we're gonna skip over this. Yeah, they got a lot of information in here, but I think we'll just skip over to the specifications part. The KLR650 is liquid cooled, which means it has antifreeze and a radiator and a water pump and a lot of components that could possibly cause you issues out on the road or the trail. Not really gonna have to worry about that on the XR or the DR. The DR650 is air cooled, but like they mentioned earlier, it does also have that oil cooler on it, which I don't know. I think it's right here. Really kind of hard to see, but it's this piece right here. And that does have a little bit of a screen over it, and you do have this bar that sort of protects it. But technically, it is still something that could get damaged. However, thanks to Jason, I now know that there is a trick where you can unplug the cooler line from the top here and from where it goes into the engine sump. And I believe I think you connect the line from up here down here, because I think this goes to the oil cooler. I don't remember. It'll probably make more sense if you're looking at it, and I wouldn't suggest just plugging things in randomly. I would do some research if you get one of these or have one of these and want to know about that hack. But that is definitely something that I would recommend knowing about and carrying tools to swap over just in case. Compression ratio 9.5 to 1. This is essentially when the piston is all the way down at the bottom of the cylinder, that volume that's left in there, that number compared to the volume that's left when the piston is all the way at the top of the cylinder, that difference in volume is your compression ratio. So lower number, a little bit less performance, better longevity though. This is pretty similar to both the XR and the KLR. Fuel system, we've got a Mikuni BST40 single carburetor. So if you really want a carburetor, you don't want to go to fuel injection like the new KLRs have, but you still want to buy a brand new showroom floor bike, then you can definitely either go with the XR or the DR if you still want to be able to swap in jets when you're doing your performance modding. Lubrication, wet sump, that's just basically the style of oil delivery system. Essentially just means that all of your oil is in the bottom of the engine. Drivetrain, wet multi-plate, if you guys want to see what that looks like. Here's my buddy Jason taking his apart, and if you guys missed that video, you can definitely check it out. I can put a link for it down in the description, but essentially he's taking this whole clutch off of the bike to get to the neutral sensor. The piece that actually holds the sensor is made of plastic, and that plastic can shrink after it's tightened down by the factory, and now newer models will have those screws thread locked in place. This bike, being a 2006, didn't have that. I'm not sure exactly what the years are. You can look that up. But essentially that's why we went in and took this apart and Loctited those together. Kind of a pain in the butt. Something I think that you should keep an eye out for. Essentially, if you're riding one of these around and the neutral light starts flickering on you, I would say shut it off and stop riding it and see what's going on in here. There it is right there. There's a screw here and a screw down here, and those go into the case, and he's just putting thread locker on those. and then you basically just put the whole thing back together. Maybe not quite as big a deal as the doohickey or the thermobob, but not everybody wants to take a whole side of their engine apart. Transmission, of course, since this is a big bore dual sport dinosaur, we just have a 5-speed. Jason did seem to think that going down to his 14-tooth sprocket was more than enough. I don't know if that's just because he doesn't really plan on doing a whole lot of highway. Chain drive, 525 was the XR a 520? I think it was. Chassis, telescopic coil spring, oil damped. Of course, we don't have any numbers, nothing for the back either. Link type, coil spring, oil damped. And much like both the KLR and the XR, we just have the single rotor up front, which could definitely be better. Again, that's sort of an old motorcycle thing. A lot of new bikes nowadays will have dual calipers or a big enough caliper to give you more than enough stopping power. 21-inch tire up front, which is what we would expect to see on a bike like this. 17 in the rear. I don't know how much of a difference it's really going to make, but the XR650 does have an 18, which is more or less what you see on the more aggressive off-road bikes. The KLR650 also does have a 17 in the rear, and while it's obviously not the most off-road capable bike, I don't know that I've ever specifically noticed or wished for a larger wheel. Tank capacity, we are looking at a 3.4 gallon tank if we're in the US, or a 3.2 gallon tank if we're in Canada. But in comparison, of course, the KLR650 has a giant 6.1 gallon tank. So you're still looking at about half of the range, a bit better than the 2.8 that the XR has. But either of these bikes, if you're going to make them into sort of an adventure bike, you're going to need to carry some extra fuel or replace the tank. And it looks like you actually can get this in the black and iron gray or the solid special white number 2. And it looks like this guy thinks it comes with a rake of 28 degrees. So if you've got a Gen 1 or a Gen 2, I think you're actually going to be a little bit closer as far as the rake goes. The Gen 3 KLR got a longer swing arm and a increased rake. The further out the front tire is in front of the bike, and the more rake that you have, obviously to a point, the easier the bike is to sort of float around in the dirt, the sand, the mud, the snow, where if it is more tucked under the bike like a sport bike, it'll feel better on the road, it'll feel more solid, but it will want to sort of dig and dive off-road and kind of fight you because you're basically steering directly down on the tire, so it can throw the bike around a bit more. As far as electrical stuff goes, we don't have a whole lot to talk about here. The gauge cluster on here is still a very old yet kind of cool and fitting analog style gauge with a couple lights, CDI electronic ignition. We've got our spark plug and our headlight along with the bulb type, which is kind of nice, and then our tail light as well. Wheelbase here, we can compare 58.7 to the 60.6 inch wheelbase, 2 inches smaller about. I mean, that's a bit smaller. That's definitely noticeable. And the new redesigned Gen 3 KLR is longer than the Gen 1 or the Gen 2. In comparison to the XR, which is also a bit smaller, 57.3 to 58.7. Ground clearance on the DR is a pretty decent 10.4 inches. On the KLR650, we've got a pretty low slung 8.3 inches of ground clearance. Again, that is with the plastic skid plate on there, where the DR and the XR both would be just to the frame. Still not going to make a huge difference. 8 inches versus 10 obviously is 10.4 is quite a bit. 13 inches on the XR. Curb weight, which means the bike has fuel in the tank, oil in the engine, and any sort of brake fluid or whatever else you need. The DR weighs in at supposedly 366 pounds, so that is 90.2 pounds lighter than my non-ABS standard 2022 KLR650. However, with all my crash protection and everything else aftermarket that I've got on the bike, including the tires, which definitely do weigh a bit, I believe it was closer to 490. And if you guys want to check out that video where I weighed the bike, you are more than welcome, but we'll just go with that. And if I wasn't going to put anything on the DR at all, that would make this bike stock 124 pounds lighter than my adventured up KLR650. That's a lot of weight. That's like 40 pounds lighter than me. And if we compare the DR to the 346 pounds that the XR650 has to lug around, we're looking at 20 pounds different. I think a gallon of gas is about 6 pounds, so Yeah, that's a bit of extra fuel you could carry and still be just as light. 12-month limited warranty, and of course, you can purchase more of a protection plan if you like. Front and rear suspension provide generous 260mm or 10.2-inch wheel travel for superb performance over rough terrain. They're both just 10.2? That seems not possible. For the KLR here, front is 7.9 inches of travel, rear is 8 inches. The XR650 is a much better 11.6 inches up front and 11 inches in the back. I mean, both obviously much better than the KLR numbers. I mean, 8 versus 10 is a decent amount. So, I mean, it's going to be much better to jump, or it should be much better to jump anyways. Suspension travel is important, but if you've got nothing but mashed potatoes inside of that suspension, I mean, then it's not going to matter. I mean, if it's super bouncy, if it's not set up for the type of riding that you're going to do, it's not going to be good. The 06 model that I rode anyways did seem pretty decent. I mean, I didn't do a whole lot of intense stuff with it, but the bit of riding that I did with it, it felt good. Hollow type wheel axles and aluminum beam style swing arm reduce unsprung weight. All right. We do also have disc sizes here, 11.4 inch floating disc in the front, 9.4 in the rear. I think the brakes worked okay on this. I didn't really notice that they were extraordinarily good or extraordinarily bad. We can get a cargo rack and skid plate from Suzuki, $7,099. I think this is actually the 2024 price. I guess it's really only a few bucks more. One thing that maybe is worth mentioning, though, that I do really like about this bike, that actually I guess the KLR has now and the XR does not, is that you've got this nice grab handle back here, which, I mean, might seem sort of silly until you start to try to ride a giant bike like this off-road and realize that there's nothing to grab onto on the back other than the hot exhaust. Having a grab bar like this is super important and something that I pretty much try to add to all my bikes, just because if you're going to ride in tight quarters, you need to be able to grab the back of the bike and heft it around. It also helps to sort of tip it up on the kickstand to do the kind of pivot turn, which is a very dangerous thing if you don't know what you're doing. So make sure you look that up before you before you give that a try on your DR. And of course, just like all the other Japanese manufacturers, Suzuki does not feel like it's important to put their horsepower or torque numbers on their website. So we got to go to Google here to check that out. And it looks like we've got 43.5 horsepower, which would be engine horsepower, not including any of the losses between the engine and where the tire hits the pavement. Any point in between there where you're losing or where you're creating heat through friction, you have a possibility to lose horsepower. So that's why if you look at dyno numbers, you're looking at what's coming off the rear wheel, not what's coming off of the engine. So that's why you'll see some different numbers out there. But anyway, amongst the noise from my beautiful songbirds out there, KLR650, the Gen 3 has about 40 horsepower. I think the older gens had about that as well, maybe a little bit less. I think it was like 38 or something. Doesn't really feel any difference since it's a little bit heavier than the previous years were. The XR supposedly also has about 40 horsepower. Again, these are, I believe, the motor numbers, not at the rear wheel. Oh, look at this. I didn't even realize this. So they actually are telling us here what the horsepower is at the rear wheel. Max torque, 39.8 foot-pounds. And of course, they always say at an RPM because it's not making that power all over the RPM range. There's a certain RPM where you get max horsepower and a certain RPM where you get max torque. With just a little bit of work to the DR650 that Jason's got, he definitely was able to unlock a little bit more wheelie power here. He said basically all he has to do now is crack the throttle and it pulls the front end up. Of course, I'm sure a lot of you guys aren't intending to buy one of these to hoon wheelies down the main drag in your town, but it is really helpful to be able to just pop the front tire up when you're riding around off-road. It's a very important skill to learn, and I think there are a lot of ways you can get a lot of bikes to do it, but obviously I think it is good to know that if you're buying a bike that maybe can't do it off the factory floor like my 701 can, it's good to know that you can at least do a few quick things to make that happen. So in comparison here, the KLR650 has 39.1 foot-pounds of torque, where the XR has 47. The 3 extra ponies versus the 20 pounds lighter. I mean, the XR is going to be, I would think, a lot more snappy compared to the KLR. I mean, obviously with the 460 pound weight, basically the same horsepower or a little less, and the 40 foot-pounds of torque rather than 47. I wanted the KLR650 for the wind protection and everything, but when I was comparing these two bikes myself, it seemed like most people just said, oh, it's not any good off-road. It's a road bike, it's not good off-road. By now, I have more than proven that it can be an off-road bike. Obviously, it's not the easiest off-road bike. I mean, anybody with enough practice can probably ride a big adventure bike off-road, but obviously it's not the best idea or something that's, maybe super safe, which is why I'm looking at bikes that are a little bit lighter and easier to ride. Something that you guys brought up on the XR650 is the fact that it doesn't have a cush drive. A cush drive is essentially this piece that is sort of bolted to the sprocket here. As you can see, we've got these large pieces that I'm pointing to that stick up a bit, and those will fit into each of these slots that I'm pointing at. And in between them, basically, you've just got these big chunks of rubber that will sort of lessen the impact of the back tire when you are either taking off or slowing down. Obviously that gets transferred through the chain right to the engine, so it can kind of save your chain and sprockets, and I think kind of makes the ride now a little bit less, I don't know, jolty or intense. So is the DR650 gonna be my next bike? I don't think it makes sense. Jason already having a DR650, me having the 701, just like the XR, like I said last week, I have suggested the DR to plenty of you guys, and I've heard back from some of you guys that you're really happy with your XR or your DR, which is great. And I think that's honestly the most important thing, is what you're going to be the most happy with. If you think the DR makes more sense, if you think the XR makes more sense, honestly, in a lot of situations, probably in my situation, it would have made a lot more sense, but I just wanted to see what I could get the KLR to do. I'm sure I could get the DR650 to do more, but I could also get my 701 to do, probably even more. The perfect combination. I really do like my 701. This bike weighs about 350 pounds. It makes like 70 some horsepower. It's just an absolutely insane motorcycle to ride. I love it so much. It definitely does concern me a little bit that it might not, more images here, that it might not last forever, or that it, might send a piston through the side of the engine while I'm out riding, but man, I sure will have fun riding it until then. The other thing that you want to keep an eye on if you're buying an old one of these is the seal retainer. Again, this is fixed on the newer models, but Jason's being a 2006, behind his stock sprocket here, there is a seal basically from where that shaft comes out of the engine, and up until a certain year, somewhat recently, they hadn't been putting anything on there to keep that seal in place, and it could blow out. So now on newer bikes, they've been putting this part that you can purchase, which is exactly what Jason did here. It's a stock Suzuki part number that he purchased, and if you guys want to check out this video, you can check that out. We've got links and stuff for that, but basically it just goes in there and keeps that in place. That and that safety switch, the neutral safety switch, are really the only things I think that I'm aware of anyways that you need to look out for if you purchase an older one of these. A newer one, again, check the years and stuff. Should be easy enough to find online. We'll already have this stuff fixed for you. Other than that, these are supposed to be pretty well bulletproof bikes and pretty good performing bikes both on and off road. So I think it's a great option if it's something that you're looking at in comparison to the KLR. Again, just depending on what it is that you're wanting or needing the bike to do, and depending on your stature and riding experience, I think either one could be a great bike. But I think the DR is going to be obviously sort of the best middle ground between the XR and the KLR if you're looking for something to do both a little bit of road and a little bit of off-road. I think this is probably your best option. And honestly, a lot of them have a pretty good resale value, so it's not going to be the end of the world to pick one up, ride it for a bit, and then change your mind and switch it out for something else. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this video was helpful and informative to you. If it was, let me know down in the comments section. If you guys want to see what I go with, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I promise I will buy a new bike eventually. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Stay safe. Stay swanky. Get out. Enjoy this beautiful world any chance you get.